what if I told you there is a fun masterclass on Stoicism, Buddhism, maybe a little Frankl thrown in, and you don't have to read a single philosopher to get it. And you might actually laugh along the way. Would you do it? Because I think you can. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Rachel. I was cleaning out some storage space in the basement recently. One of those jobs you put off for approximately forever because you know it's going to be a whole thing. And in a box I haven't opened in probably 25 years, I found this. A Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, clipped from a newspaper, which should tell you exactly how old this thing is, because when's the last time any of us clipped something from a newspaper? And I know exactly where this was. It was on my bulletin board in my office when I worked in HR, which, if you think about it, is either the most ironic place to post this particular cartoon or the most honest one. Maybe a little bit of both. I'll let you decide. Okay, so here's what it says. Calvin and Hobbes are walking along, and Calvin says to Hobbes, "I've decided to stop caring about things. If you care, you just get disappointed all the time. If you don't care, nothing matters. So you're never upset. From now on, my rallying cry is, 'So what?'" And Hobbes says, "That's a tough cry to rally around." And Calvin says, "So what?" Okay, so a 6-year-old has just constructed a completely airtight philosophical argument for checking out of life. And his tiger, in the way Hobbes always did, doesn't argue with the logic. He doesn't lecture. He just quietly points out that "so what" is a really tough cry to rally around. And Calvin, completely unbothered, says, "So what?" I love this strip so much. I have loved Calvin and Hobbes since it came out in 1985. Instantly fell in love with it. Carried it into adulthood, into jobs, apparently into a box in storage I forgot existed. And when I found this clipping, I remembered and I went looking. And sure enough, we have 3 Calvin and Hobbes books that were on a shelf in my basement that I genuinely forgot we owned. 31 years after the strip ended, still on my shelf, still true. I have been rereading them all since I found this cartoon, staying up way too late, totally at peace with that decision, 0 regrets. And here's what hit me when rereading them as an adult who has spent the last several years reading about Stoicism and Buddhism and Frankl and all these other people. Calvin and Hobbes is a masterclass, in my opinion, an actual, genuine, laugh-out-loud masterclass in exactly the kind of things I talk about on this channel. Watterson was intentionally doing it the whole time. I just didn't have the framework to see it when I was younger. So, stick with me here. This might seem weird, but this is just how my brain works. Today, I want to talk about this comic strip I found in a box and what I think it's actually saying, because honestly, I think a lot of us are living somewhere inside it right now. First, and I promise this is relevant and also kind of mind-blowing, can we talk about Bill Watterson for a second? Because I have just learned something I did not know despite loving this strip for over 30 years. The info was there in one of the books, and I just never read it or totally glossed over it. The names. Calvin and Hobbes. Not random, not cute, completely deliberate. Calvin is named after John Calvin, the 16th century theologian who believed in predestination, that human beings are fundamentally flawed and there's an order to the universe we simply do not get to negotiate with. Hobbes is named after Thomas Hobbes, the philosopher who believed human nature is chaotic and self-interested, but that reason is how we build something better out of that chaos. Watterson named a chaotic, ego-driven, reality-resistant 6-year-old after a theologian obsessed with human limitation. And he gave him a tiger named after a philosopher trying to make sense of human nature. And then he let him work it out in the comic section for 10 years. Now, personally, I read the comic strip for Spaceman Spiff, for the snowmen and the monsters under the bed, for the cardboard box time machine and the wagon rides down a hill, for Calvin Ball, which, by the way, is a game Calvin invented specifically because he refused to play by anyone else's rules, which is totally on brand. I had absolutely no idea I was getting a philosophy seminar delivered in the daily comics, and Watterson absolutely knew what he was doing. He studied political science at Kenyon College, and in 1990, right in the middle of the strip's run, he gave a commencement speech there, and he said this: "To invent your own life's meaning is not easy, but it's still allowed, and I think you'll be happier for the trouble." And then later he said, "Reading those turgid philosophers may not get you a job, but if those books have forced you to ask yourself questions about what makes life truthful, purposeful, meaningful, and redeeming, you have the Swiss Army knife of mental tools, and it's going to come in handy all the time." Now, I love that phrase, the Swiss Army knife of mental tools, because honestly, that's what Calvin and Hobbes was. Every strip. He just disguised it as a kid and a tiger so you'd actually pick it up and laugh. And the strip genuinely changed as it went on. The early years are mostly chaos and jokes, and Calvin being a tiny, chaotic menace. Very funny and always relatable. But as Watterson fought for more creative freedom from his syndicate, the strip went deeper. The artwork got more beautiful. The conversations got bigger. The philosophy stopped hiding quite so much, which makes sense. It's how most things worth anything actually work once somebody stops trying so hard to make them marketable. But back to Calvin. Let's give him some credit here, because his argument is not stupid. If you care, you just get disappointed all the time. If you don't care, nothing matters, so you're never upset. That's definitely not stupid. That's a pretty adult conclusion real people reach all the time. You've probably reached it. I definitely have. If you've ever worked in a helping profession, and I spent years in human resources and as a massage therapist, surrounded by people bringing me their very human messes every single day, you have absolutely reached it at some point. You know, the world is a lot right now. I don't even watch the news anymore. It has become basically its own personality category. Checked out, numb, detached, and not caring has practically become an aspiration for most of us. Calvin didn't invent this strategy. He just said it out loud with the honesty of a 6-year-old who doesn't realize he's describing half the adult population. And then Hobbes answers him in 7 words. That's a tough cry to rally around. That's it. No lecture, no inspirational speech. No, here's why you're wrong, Calvin. He just quietly points out the gap between the theory and the actual experience of life. Because here's the thing. You can say, so what? You can build your whole identity around not caring, and it'll hold for a little while, until something gets through anyway. Because you're a person, and that's what happens to people. And when it does, you've got nothing underneath you. No footing, no framework or resilience. Just a rallying cry that is, as advertised, really tough to rally around. Now, the Stoics actually had a name for what Calvin is struggling with here. The dichotomy of control. What's yours to influence and what isn't. Epictetus said some things are up to us and some things are not, and the work is learning to tell the difference. Calvin has absolutely not learned this. He spends basically the entire run of the comic outraged that reality refuses to cooperate with his preferences. Parents, school, bedtimes, homework, gravity, the laws of physics, society in general. He literally invents a word, transmography, because of course he does. When reality won't bend to your will, Calvin's solution is apparently to invent new verbs and try anyway. But then something happens in certain strips. Something shifts. They'll be sledding or flying down a hill in a wagon that should absolutely have killed them by now, or staring up at the stars, and Calvin goes quiet. The chaotic kid powers down for just a minute, and suddenly he's talking about the vastness of the universe, the strange miracle of being alive, the way time moves and how small we are in it. The little chaos engine just stops, and what's underneath it looks a lot like what the Buddhists call the beginner's mind. Pure presence and wonder. No agenda. Just this, right now. Watterson drew the seasons changing in the backgrounds of those strips with this ridiculous level of care for a newspaper comic strip. Snow falling, leaves changing, storms rolling in, light through the trees, impermanence everywhere, which is basically the Buddhist concept of anicca. Nothing holds its shape forever, and that is not a tragedy. That's just the nature of things. And Calvin and Hobbes run through it, totally alive in the moment, not trying to freeze any of it in place. And now, we need to talk about Hobbes, because Watterson eventually confirms it. Hobbes is a stuffed animal. There's a whole storyline where Calvin loses him. A dog knocks him down and takes off with Hobbes, and Calvin is devastated. He searches for days. He can't sleep. Lies awake in bed going, "Whatever it was, I'm sorry already," which honestly is both funny and painfully relatable. Calvin's neighbor, Susie, who's either not his favorite person or his secret crush, finds Hobbes in a field. And what does she do? She invites Hobbes to a tea party. Calvin eventually decides to ask Susie to keep an eye out. He's on his way to do exactly that when he spots them over a fence. Susie, Hobbes, a bunny, and a full tea service. Hobbes sitting there in a tiny chair while Susie cheerfully asks if anyone wants more tea. He never even had to ask her. Calvin is horrified. He swallows every ounce of pride he has, and he goes to get him. Susie's parting line is, "Well, wasn't Mr. Calvin a gentleman? I do hope... Hey, who took all the cookies?" Calvin. Obviously. Calvin took the cookies. But to Susie, Hobbes is a stuffed animal having tea. To Calvin, Hobbes is the wisest presence in his life. And Watterson refused to explain that dynamic. Said explaining it would ruin it. And I think he was right, because the explanation doesn't matter nearly as much as what it represents. The patience, the grounding, the steadiness, and the perspective. The quiet, that's a tough cry to rally around, that's coming from somewhere inside Calvin. Hobbes is just the shape it takes on the outside before he is mature enough to recognize it as his own. That's not a quirk of a comic strip. That's the entire point, because I think humans do this all the time. We externalize the wiser, grounded voice. We put it in mentors and books, religion and philosophy, teachers, fictional characters, until eventually, hopefully, we realize it's something we were building inside ourselves all along. So, back to the comic strip. Calvin wants the peace without the practice, the outcome of equanimity, never being upset, without doing the actual work to build it. And I say this with total affection for him, because I have wanted the exact same thing, and I'm guessing you have too. Real equanimity, the kind the Stoics practiced, the kind Buddhism tries to build, the kind Frankl found in genuinely impossible circumstances. It isn't the absence of caring. It's caring without being destroyed by every outcome. It's keeping your hands open instead of clenched. It's learning what belongs to you and what doesn't, over and over and over again, in a very unglamorous ordinary life. I think it's what Watterson was talking about in that commencement speech. Not answers, questions. The ability to keep questioning yourself enough to stay awake in your own life. So what is not a question or a philosophy. It's a door closing. The Swiss Army knife keeps that door open, even when life is genuinely hard, unfair, exhausting, and totally absurd. Now, here's what I want you to take from this. Philosophy isn't only in those old books waiting for serious people in serious rooms to find it. It's in a comic strip you clipped from a newspaper. It's in a song that hits differently at 50 than it did at 25. It's in something your kid said at dinner that stopped you cold. It's everywhere, always trying to teach us something if we're open to seeing it. It's been there the whole time. The only variable is whether you're paying attention. Watterson ended Calvin and Hobbes on December 31st, 1995. The last panel showed fresh snow and a world of possibility stretching out in front of them. Calvin says, "It's a magical world, old buddy. Let's go exploring." And that's it. No lesson, no bow, just keep going with curiosity. The world is still there, and so are you. 31 years later, I am rereading these books. This cartoon is going on my fridge. And honestly, the tiger still knows things before the kid does. And on any given day, I'm still figuring out which one I am. Maybe that's normal. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe Calvin figured it out eventually. He still absolutely stole the cookies, though. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this weird stuff that runs through my brain. Take care of you, and I will see you the next time. Bye-bye. And again, for most of you who are wondering, where is Reggie? He's down here. He's just been hanging out with me most of the time. I think he wandered around a little bit, but for the most part, there he is. All right, have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.